All right, today we are going to be doing a quick lesson on complex sentences, which is an essential for really writing well in English. This lesson is adapted from pages 9 through 13 of a book that I have called Everything You Need to Ace English Language Arts in One Big Fat Book. And I've thrown some of my own stuff in there for good measure. So, what is a complex sentence? A complex sentence is when a sentence either has two or more independent clauses, which we'll cover in a second, or it has an independent clause and one or more dependent clauses, and those clauses are joined by a coordinating conjunction. And once you do that, once you take those multiple clauses and join them by a coordinating conjunction, you get a complex sentence. So if we look to the right, we can see a list of coordinating conjunctions. Those conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And each of them is nicely represented by a superhero standing on top of an octagon, which I pulled offline. This is not my own art. So let's look at two examples. The first example is Spider-Man stood upon the red octagon, but Captain America stood upon the blue one. And this goes along with situation number one, has two or more independent clauses. So if we look at the clause Spider-Man stood upon the red octagon, we could put a period after that and it's its own sentence. Same thing with Captain America stood upon the blue one. It could be its own sentence if we didn't have the stuff that came before it. However, we have a complex sentence because we've joined the two sentences with but. So Spider-Man stood upon the red octagon, comma, but Captain America stood upon the blue one. So we get a complex sentence because it represents both superheroes standing there on their own octagons at the same time in one sentence. The second example goes along with situation number two. So we've got Mr. Lassard knew the picture above was cheesy when he chose it, yet he used it anyway. So in this case, we have an independent clause. Mr. Lassard knew the picture above was cheesy. And that, we could put it as a period at the end of that, and that would be its own sentence. We also have another independent clause. It's he used it anyway. So that could also be its own sentence. He used it anyway. And then in the middle, we've got this dependent clause, which is when he chose it. So that cannot be its own sentence. It has to be put together with an independent clause for it to make sense, which is why it comes at the end of Mr. Lassard knew the picture above was cheesy when he chose it. Now, with that said, we've got the independent and dependent clauses in the first part, and then another independent clause in the second part. But if we want it all to be one cohesive thought, we can add the coordinating conjunction yet, so that it reads, Mr. Lassard knew the picture above was cheesy when he chose it, yet he used it anyway. And that again gives us a more complex understanding of this situation. We can understand that Mr. Lassard has chosen this picture despite what he knows. So a complex sentence, just to recap, takes multiple different clauses, both independent and dependent, and ties them together with a coordinating conjunction. There's one other type of complex sentence that we call a subordinated complex sentence, and that is when we want to show that a dependent clause depends upon an independent clause. So when we have a dependent clause and an independent clause, and we want it to be clear how they depend upon each other, then we use a subordinated complex sentence. So subordinating conjunctions accomplish this usually because we want to show a time or a place or a cause and effect relationship. So let's look at an example. We've got the example, Batman grimaced as he wound up to punch because he knew it was going to hurt. So in this case, we're showing a cause and effect relationship. Batman grimaced because it was going to hurt. And because he knew it was going to hurt, right? We could also reverse that, and we could say because he knew it was going to hurt, Batman grimaced as he wound up to punch. And in this case, we know that one is causing the other. And that's a coordinated complex sentence. A second example says, since he had never been hurt by Batman before, Superman glared back at his foe. And again, we're showing a cause and effect relationship. Superman's glaring at Batman because he's never been hurt before. He's not expecting to be hurt again. So we can combine both of those sentences so that they operate together. And we say, since he had never been hurt by Batman before, Superman glared back at his foe. But we can also reverse that and say Superman glared back at his foe since he had never been hurt by Batman before. So a nice thing about subordinated complex sentences is that you can flip them around backwards and forwards. So if you want to have a complex sentence that shows time, place, or cause and effect, you can do so by using a subordinating conjunction. And then you can make them even more complex by combining coordinated and subordinated clauses so that you've got complex sentences. So if you have used a coordinating conjunction, but you also want to use a subordinating conjunction because you want to show a cause and effect relationship as well as just combining your ideas, then you could end up with something like this. Since he thought his picture should come before Batman's, Superman held a grudge against Batman, and that grudge culminated in a battle between the two heroes. So in this case, we've got two subordinated clauses. He thought his picture should come before Batman's. Superman held a grudge against Batman. Both of those are subordinated. They're showing the cause and effect of why Superman is holding the grudge, what causes Superman to hold the grudge. And then we have the coordinated part of the sentence, and that grudge culminated in a battle between the two heroes, which just adds a little bit more detail to this idea of what's going on with this grudge. So at this point, you should have some notes about what coordinated and subordinated complex sentences are, and you're going to be asked to practice them from here on out.